Ladies and gentlemen, this is internet personality Vangelus, and HobbyLink Japan's Hall of Armor dropped off a powerful chunk of superior tech for me to take a look at, in the form of Sentinel's re-edit Hulkbuster. The 5th re-edit release in Chemical Attack's small line of Tony Stark armor suits, Hulkbuster is by far the largest, and also calls directly back to the first release in the line, the Bleeding Edge suit. Like, very, very directly. Ridiculously directly. You won't even believe how directly... Alright, yeah, it's a good point. Let's get this review on the road. Maintaining the sleek aesthetic that he's been going for in this series of Iron Man figures, Chemical Attack delivers a rendition of the Hulkbuster suit that looks lithe for a Hulkbuster. Speaking as a career Iron Man newbie, I feel this piece pulls more from the comic imagery than the Age of Ultron film imagery, with slightly top-loaded bulk and a lot of curved lines despite the hefty chunk of the figure's bulky silhouette. Also, the 2 power pylons sticking out of the shoulder blades is like personalized aesthetic candy for my taste. Paintwork on this guy is a sea of ruby red and metallic gold for the most part. The red is mostly glossy with a few shots of flatter metallic thrown in for visual variance, and the glossy parts look kinda weird at times, as from some angles it starts to look fractured due to the way it refracts light. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it did briefly make me think I had a real nasty blemish before I turned the figure over in my hands, and the surface began to look cleaner. Otherwise, the finish looks quite palatable for the premium price point to my eyes, and the use of some clear bits on the shoulders and back add happy punches of variance, albeit at a bare minimum amount. Rolling back the dome-like helmet reveals another helmet, and pushing down on the dome-like helmet once it's folded back reveals some sexy interlinked Sentinel engineering to show off the rest of the upper chest of the Bleeding Edge Iron Man suit, like the re-edit one from the beginning of the line. The idea is that it's buried inside of this thing, though that isn't literally the case, but I love the callback to the line's debut release, now that it's hit the end of its first quote-unquote run. The Bleeding Edge inner suit has got 2 points of highly posable articulation on the top and bottom of the neck, pushing the feature up another notch in quality. There's a weird see-through version of the Hulkbuster helmet that can slide down over the Bleeding Edge's face, but it is really hard to get out of there without a tool of some kind. And it doesn't look great to me. But hey, layered features! We already know all about the posability of the head inside the Hulkbuster, but what about the head on top of the Hulkbuster? It can swivel around like this, due to the fact that it flips up. Hello. It can go down, way down. He can look right inside his navel. The chin piece here means that you have to move it above this divot to get it to turn left or right, because it hits that. Also, lots of these joints are at risk of paint bumping into paint. I don't really mind, but they point out specifically right here on the hips, like, just be aware of what you're doing. Before we get to the hips, let's talk shoulders. These shoulder pads, look at this thing. Look at that. Hinges and hinges, and rivets, swivels everywhere. This thing goes wherever it needs to, and it feels great. It feels almost like a steady cam moving around. As for the shoulder itself down here, it's on a butterfly thingy, so you can move it forwards and backwards. When you do, you don't reveal any detail back in here, and that I found quite disappointing given the pedigree of re-edit. There is a forward and backwards motion, there is an outward swivel, there's a bicep swivel, there's a double jointed elbow on a guy this big. It's pretty easy to accidentally start pulling the magnetic thing off, but it's pretty easy to put it back on. As for this part, this is where we get to the good stuff with the re-edit line, because as I bend this elbow, you're gonna see some things happen. Look at all that. Oh, baby. That was worth. Let's do it one more time. Oh, baby. Yeah, I dig it. I feel okay now. Especially because I need that high. The wrists are a little bit loose. They're just like a ball sockety thing. They're around an LED light. So the light is not in the moving part. The moving part is cupped onto the light. I can appreciate that. This feels a little bit looser than I might have liked. As for the fingers, oh, they move. The thumb is on this ball-shaped cut swivel joint. It's like, hey, don't do that. It's like a ball that's cut in half so the thumb can move up and down and swivel at the top and bottom of that ball. That's kind of cool. And then the thumb also hinges twice, so you can give a beefy thumbs up. As for the fingers, don't be so crooked. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And they can splay up a little bit. There's no outward splay other than the one that's by design. The one by design looks very natural. I like these hands a lot. Sentinel have written clinics before on posable hands with stuff like their Armor Rodders, Bellerophon input, and this is up to par. I like it a lot. You can do all kinds of things. You can have him point, you can have him thumbs up, you can have him drink some tea and pinky swear. Up here on the torso, be careful what you grab, because that, you know, this mechanism, things are a little bit springy here in the middle. So it's not been like at risk, but if you grab and start like pulling on that, I think that could mess with the mechanism a little, so try to grab more so back over here. There is a mid-ab joint that lets him tilt side to side, and he doesn't really crunch there, but he does move up here. And when you move him up, you can see inside here, that gold stuff, that's designed to mimic the ab detail of the bleeding edge armor. That's kind of cool. As for moving forward, that's the lower joint, where he can crunch forward like that, revealing some similar detail, but just down here in his posterior, his plumber's butt, if you will. All those plates. He can also turn left and right here, a little bit up top, but then a solid one down below, and this can also tilt a little bit. These little hip things can get out of the way. They don't feel amazing when they do it. These parts do. These little jointed skirts. Now that was in shot. But these get out of the way of the hips. This is where stuff can bang together pretty easily, so be aware of what you're doing. There's a universal jointed hip, so it can go forward. If you move this up and out of the way, you can get real forward. It can go outward. Get the skirt going up and go real outward. I don't think this guy can do quite the full Van Damme, but he can get pretty close. And FYI, it's the Hulkbuster suit doing this, just in case you forgot. There is a thigh swivel, and then there's a double-jointed knee, and, yeah, Sentinel. Let's get closer. Sentinel! And let's go from behind. Sentinel! Look at that. Just sucked that jet thing right in there. I dig that. I wanted to see this kind of stuff on a scale larger than what I'd seen before, and it's oh so satisfying. As for the feet and ankles and things, the stuff that can get out of the way is this flap here. And get out of your way. This flap doesn't. This is the cover that comes off for the batteries. But there's a hinge here and a hinge here to allow the foot to move forwards and backwards, if you choose. And then there's a toe joint here with a separate moving cover piece here, but they tend to operate in tandem more so than need to be operated separately. And then for tilting, it's down here in the base. You get some tilting. The only downside of all this is the lack of connective tissue outside of the joints makes this look a little bit floaty in practice. And it's much like the back of the butterfly shoulder joint. I'm asking for a lot. This is an expensive toy. I think given the pedigree of stuff, like especially the bleeding edge armor, it is disappointing that there's no mechanism to cover that in moving organic-ish techie detail. Organic, mechanical-ish techie detail. But I can get this guy to stand fairly solidly. He is not a light toy. He's not made of solid die-cast metal, so he's not as heavy as some other Hulkbusters on the market, but as you can see, he still has some heaviness to him, and he needs a bit of care when you're balancing him without a stand. This guy has pitched forward a couple times, and he seems to have survived it pretty well. There might be a paint scratch or two here or there, but the only thing I'm truly worried about are these things. Like, even if you lay him down, you see it's putting pressure up on these. If you're going to lay this figure down, I'd say remove the power pylons, just to be safe, so you don't damage these connections while they're still connected. So this dude is posable. He is still Sentinel posable. I expect a Hulkbuster toy to be a bit less posable than other Iron Men in the same product lineup. This guy certainly is not as ridiculously posable as, for instance, the bleeding edge armor, but only just. It's like, you know, decimal points off. This thing is still real posable. It is, as far as I know, the most posable Hulkbuster, especially of this scale, on the market. And that's what this toy fulfills. That is the function it serves. This is the posable, heavily engineered, joint work T-Rex worked on this stuff with chemical attack Hulkbuster. Like other re-edit Iron Mans, the Hulkbuster has electronics and includes test batteries pre-installed in the box. I filmed myself as I went through to discover each set and remove the plastic stopper tabs, also to showcase how many friggin' batteries this thing has. There are 12 LR41s in total, and man, am I glad these are included right off the bat. I mean, they aren't guaranteed for any particular level of charge, so you are supposed to get your own fresh ones sooner than later, but it's nice not to have to worry about that right away. Anyway, as you go through and flip them on, you've got to appreciate all the different implementations. Having the power pylons actually contain batteries and actually deliver their charges by physically plugging them into the figure is badass in so many ways. The magnetic connections on the forearm covers, coupled with the tooled flip-up bits for battery access, badass in maybe a few less ways. The legs just having peg-on plate covers for their batteries and switches. Okay, that's kind of boring after all that other stuff. But at the end of the day, Hulkbuster lights up, and it is glorious. The mixture of colors is a welcome sight, and the only other place I would have wanted to see any illumination would be the shoulder pads, and I'll totally admit how greedy that is on my part. One thing worth noting is that as you bend the knee, the rear light gets covered, but the frontal light gets revealed. Ah, Sentinel. One less cool thing that's equally worth noting is that the chest and eye lights are actually happening on the inner bleeding edge sculpt. While that looks cool, the optic LEDs have to be manually lined up with the Hulkbuster's own eye slits, and that doesn't always work out. I kinda wish the clear secondary display had been more reflective, to bounce light around in the helmet and not rely so much on synchronized beam placement. Re-edit Hulkbuster includes the requisite re-edit Iron Man stand. That's cool. It's almost entirely useless as a stand for the big guy, but you can complete a Hall of Armor display if that's your thing. That would have been a hardcore sore point for me had Sentinel not included this bountifully huge and somewhat modular second stand in the box. At its core is the Sentinel stand seen on various Rio bots and other releases, and the posable arm uses a solid clip-on connection to the Hulkbuster's groin to allow for a plethora of posing options. The arm's joints are all screw-tightenable, which this figure definitely will need to make use of if you want it to look like it's flying, or jump kicking, or backflipping, or all kinds of things that, why would the Hulkbuster be backflipping? The strange 7-inch-ish scale of the re-edit line would have claimed another victim if not for the fact that this Hulkbuster rendition is, apparently, almost the same rough size as the SH Figuarts and Marvel Legends 6-inch scaled versions. I mean, until you pop the hood and see the giant bleeding edge head. So don't! If you want this to be your 112 shelves Hulkbuster, that is. While the figure isn't a behemoth of die-cast metal content, I think there is still enough heft to the suit to feel satisfying in hand, and the articulation is, as I expected, totally a feature of this figure. It is my understanding that this is the most posable Hulkbuster toy on the market, as of the end of April 2016, so take that as you will. The re-edit line is one long story of really expensive Iron Men that aren't big or small enough to satisfy many grand-scale collectors, but I believe the most expensive piece in the series absolutely maintains expectation. You're getting an enormously and creatively engineered posable figure, with a strong fit and finish, oodles of shiny paint, and a pile of LEDs. I love the style and in-hand feel of this figure, just as I did with the Bleeding Edge Iron Man that kicked off the line. I can't say that I'd recommend this figure to everyone, but it is well worth your consideration if you're someone with a focus on raw style and delightful articulation engineering. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and while I feel bad saying it due to my love of the project, I think I'd be alright with the Iron Man re-edit series coming to a close on this release. There are plenty more suits that could be done, but 2 Iron Men, an Iron Patriot, a War Machine, and a Hulkbuster? That's a design story. And probably the opening of a really nerdy joke.